And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Banner Monday, where we kick off each week by doing what IU fans love more than anything else, and that is talking hoops. This is the 22nd edition of Banner Monday, and it is our 507th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the afternoon of April 1st, 2019. I am your host, Jerod Morris, and let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud Banner moment. This week's banner moment occurred in the early evening hours on Sunday when Michigan State secured its spot in the Final Four. The Spartan victory initiated an inevitable storm of tweets and message board posts from IU fans summing up the maddening reality of the 2018-19 Hoosiers. Indiana was good enough to beat the Big Ten champion and maybe national champion Spartans twice, yet bad enough to still miss the NCAA tournament. Those two games, each won by the slimmest of margins, were everything this season could have been, surrounded by everything it ultimately was not. But as we move away from this season and start looking ahead to next season in earnest, it's worth at least pondering if anything that happened in those two games means anything for the program moving forward. Or are they destined to just be an empirical oddity when Hoosier minds wander back to the bewilderment of 2019? And I think, yes, there are some elements of those games that could mean something moving forward. In fact, next season's success depends on it. Because while Indiana was a team dominated all season by its two-star players, Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan, Indiana was able to earn its two biggest wins of the season because its other players took their star turns. Sure, Romeo was huge in the win at Michigan State, scoring 19 inefficient but essential points, but Juwan Morgan only played 13 minutes. Indiana won because Justin Smith delivered a 13-10 double-double and blocked 3 shots, and because Al Durham scored 14 points, and Devontae Green scored 11 with 5 assists, and Deron Davis delivered a 12-6-4 line. And in the home win, the difference was even more stark. Romeo and Juwan racked up numbers and some important plays because they are good players and played 73 combined minutes, but the game was won on the back of Justin Smith's supernova offensive outburst and Rob Finnessy's outstanding on-ball defense, and of course, Devontae's timely shooting. As you know, Romeo and Juwan will be gone next year. They were imperfect players, yes, but the attention they demanded, their willingness to shoulder a massive load, and the consistency of their production over the course of a long season will be missed. Without them, if Indiana is going to show growth for the third straight year under Archie Miller, which unequivocally means making the NCAA tournament, then returning but inconsistent veterans like Devontae, Deron, Al, Rob, and especially Justin will have to step up and become responsible for the usage and production that is being lost, and they will have to do it with a more prominent place in opposing scouting reports. Such is the circle of life in college basketball. On the concerning side, each player will enter next season with major question marks attached to his name, and with plenty of evidence in his history that leads us to question his readiness for an increased role. But on the optimistic side, we'll always have those wins against Michigan State and the method by which they were acquired, which was not a mirage. It was talented young players playing up to the level of their ability and up to the magnitude of the moment. Moving forward, such performances have to become the expectation, not the exception. Hopefully, each guy enters next season ready for the challenge. All right, and joining me this week on Banner Monday, as he always does, well, usually does, to help out with the Banner Monday mailbag, it is Ryan Phillips, columnist for The Big Lead, host of The Hangover. He should be here momentarily. And we will answer your questions. Got a lot of good ones. And then coming up after that, Mike DeCourcy for his final Big Ten Roundup of the season, as this will be our final edition of Banner Monday for the year. Mr. Phillips, are you with us?
I would certainly hope so. Am I here?
You are. You are here. It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too. Season's over, but you know we've got some things to talk about for the offseason.
Season doesn't it feel like the loss to Wichita State was a long time ago?
Yeah,
I feel like that was like 3 weeks ago already.
I know.
It was just Tuesday.
I guess the latest news, if we have any, is that the Indiana is showing interest in Jalen Wyndham from Ben Davis.
Yeah.
I think that he's a shooter and like a 6'5" sort of wing guard kind of guy who can certainly put the ball in the hoop, but he's shot about 37% this year from 3. So that's an interesting development. He's not a top tier recruit. He's a 3-star. Maybe I think, let's see, on the composite, he's ranked like 439. But, he's also, that was the last time the ranking was done was months ago, and he had a pretty good senior year. He was going to head to Georgia State to play for Ron Hunter, but Ron Hunter is headed to Tulane. That has put him back on the market, and a couple teams are interested in him. A couple bigger size teams that haven't filled out their classes yet are interested. So that's an interesting development. Again, with the transfer of Clifton Moore, that opened up a spot on the roster that I think everybody thought was going to be open. When Romeo declares for the draft, that'll open up a second spot. So they'll have 2 open roster spots for next year. I'd assume at least one will be a transfer and potentially 2. So they're probably dotting their I's, crossing their T's with Wyndham to get him on campus and see what they think of him in person. But certainly interesting development that they're sort of pushing for another shooter. And according to Wyndham, that was what I think it was Ed Schilling contacted him. And that's what he says. We need shooters. So clearly
we do need that.
Clearly that's the mentality from Archie and company this offseason. I think they might, if a big man is out there, there've been whispers about Joey Brunk in Indiana. If that happens, I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but certainly
Joey Brunk is on campus right now as we speak.
Yeah.
As we're talking,
and whether or not they take him is going to be interesting. But again, there's no harm in exploring these possibilities. I think people are sort of like, why are they going after Joey Brunk? Well, bringing him on campus, getting to know the kid, seeing what, he sees in his future of his game, what the program, there's no harm in getting these kids on campus and talking to them and looking them in the eye and deciding what they want to do. And I think that's the same, mentality with Wyndham. They bring him in. Maybe they think he's not as good as a player as they need. Maybe they just turn the page. But it's worth reaching out. It's worth contacting. It's worth getting kids on campus and see how they fit in.
Yep. And actually, this leads right into the first questions that we got. We got several questions about Brunk. Bruce asked, does IU have a shot for Joey Brunk? Certainly. He's on campus right now, walking around with Archie Miller. Our buddy Joel from the chat mob was tweeting out some pictures of those guys. What other players are on your wish list for recruits next year? As you just mentioned, Wyndham is a guy that is getting some interest. We've talked about, guys like Trendon Watford and Harlan Beverly and Lester Quinones in the class of 2019. Let's see if any of those guys get visits before we get too excited.
Yeah.
But Jeff Rabjohns did report that there's communication and they're talking about possibly doing an in-home visit. So I'm just kind of waiting to see if any with Trendon. I'm just kind of waiting to see if any of those things actually develop before getting too excited about them. But
yes.
Those are the possibilities in the class of 2019 still.
Yeah, I think the big one for me is I think everybody would love if Trendon Watford came. If Trendon Watford came, that would be a home run for everybody. Just he's a member of the family. Let's put it that way. I remember going to games when Christian was there and seeing Trendon and his big fro on the court after games, and thinking this kid's going to be large, because he was so young at that point, but you could just tell he's going to be a big guy.
Like also, Josh Smith, always part of the IU family.
Always part of the IU family. But it was great that Christian's family could be at a lot of those games because they're not from Indiana, but still you'd see him at a lot of the games. Somebody asked me this, is it concerned that Clifton and VJ Blackman transferred? And VJ Blackman, let's remember, he's a walk-on. And he probably went to Indiana to up his profile if he wanted to play somewhere, and probably figured, well, maybe I'll get a shot if they're down. I'll get a shot to play. He never really played. But, it probably upped his profile a little to be a transfer from Indiana to maybe a smaller school to get a chance to play. And certainly VJ should transfer if he thinks he has a chance to play somewhere else because he wasn't going to get on the court here. So that one really is not concerning. You see walk-ons transfer all the time because they get a chance to play elsewhere. As for Clifton, I think we all loved Clifton's potential, but he never worked his way onto the court. And I think everybody wishes him well going to find a place. And his place is at a smaller school where he'll get minutes and maybe develop. And he could develop into a really great player, but it's going to take time, and he's going to take time on the floor. And Indiana isn't a place where you learn on the job on the floor. You're not going to get 20 minutes a game to learn at IU in Big Ten play. You have to win games at Indiana. Yeah. And so
that is not a concerning. If Rob Finney transferred, that would be a concerning transfer.
Right. I'm just saying that, because a lot of people were talking about, well, when he was a freshman, he was on draft boards. And it's like, based on potential, but he never developed. And I think that he needs to go somewhere, and it's best for him. I think that everybody here would say, everybody on the show would say, and I'm sure the coaching staff would say, this kid needs to play to get better. And he's not going to play here right now. So unless he has just an unbelievable offseason of some kind. So yeah, I would say that both of those are good transfers, and you wish both those kids well, absolutely, because if they get a chance to play elsewhere, that's a big deal.
Hold that thought, because I want to get back to that topic.
Okay.
Real quick, to answer Sally's question about Joey Brunk, is he eligible right away? Yes. He will have 2 years of eligibility, but he did graduate, so he would be a grad transfer who could play 2 years.
The rare grad
ready to go.
Who can play 2 years.
That's how Zeisloft was. He was a grad transfer who played 2 years. So
and
just like that, which is part of why Brunk is really valuable, I think, would be a valuable get.
And it may not be that his biggest contributions would be next year. It would be potentially the year after, because again, you're going to have some good front court pieces next year, but then Deron Davis will graduate. How long is Trace Jackson Davis going to be around? You know, I mean, I think Trace
Most
Jackson,
people project him at least a 2, 3, 4
I
year
agree.
player.
I agree, but you never know. I mean, that's the thing, is you don't know. And so having an extra guy there in the front court would really help. And then the question with Brunk is, can he step out on the floor? Can he actually become a shooter? Can he develop, the ability to play inside out? I mean, I know he's a big guy, but can he develop the ability to step on the floor where you can play him with a Deron Davis, with a Trace Jackson Davis, as opposed to just, maybe shuttling in one or two of those guys at the same time? Can he be on the floor with those guys? And I think that's the next part of his game. If you watch Brunk play, that has to develop. He's got to be able to step out on the floor.
Yeah, and again, you talk about wish list, a big guy to provide you depth and insurance with Deron Davis. We've talked a lot about a wing scorer. Indiana really needs a wing scorer. And then another lead ball handler. You would love to have another guy who can be your quote-unquote point guard behind Rob Phinisee as insurance for Rob Phinisee, so that if anything happens to him, or just for the minutes he doesn't play, you're not trying to fit Devontae Gray and Al Durham into that, because that's not where they're at their best.
Right.
So if somehow you could get those three things, it would be a perfect offseason.
Right. And
probably
I think,
got to at least get two of them.
Right. And what I would say is, as far as Armon Franklin fits into that puzzle, I think he can be the backup ball handler. I don't know if he's there yet, but with a great offseason, I think he could be. And therefore, I think that point guard sort of falls down the list of things you need as a primary ball handler. But it's going to depend on Armon going to work. And Armon is a hard worker. He's a bulldog, and he's the kind of guy, you remember how when Rob was getting recruited, everybody was like, well, he's going to be Archie Miller's extension on the floor because they're the exact same guy. Like they have the same mentality. Armon's like that too. He's a bulldog. And he may have played as a combo guard in high school because he needed to, but I don't see that being his role at the next level. He can score, he can shoot, and he can finish at the rim. But I see him in the same way I saw Rob, as a guy who can come in and be steady at that place, has good vision, can move the ball around, and be a guy who can handle the ball without turning it over. Of course, he's going to be a freshman next year, so you never know. If you get a grad transfer senior who can play point guard and shoot the ball, yeah, you take that, and a guy who can be on the floor. We've seen that Rob Phinisee is good at being on the floor with other guards, whether they're ball handlers or not. So it'll fit. I would say, but if we're looking at the top two needs, I would say a wing scorer, as you said, and potentially another big guy. And the wing scorer aspect really gets a lot less of a priority if Jerome Hunter is healthy.
Which is a big if.
If.
Kurt said, if Brunk transferred, wouldn't he have to sit out a year? No, because he's a grad transfer. Grad transfers can play right away.
I think people are just confused because he's only played 2 years and he's a grad transfer. And that's the thing, is a lot of these kids, when they're smart and knock out a bunch of classes in high school, don't have as many credits to take when they get on campus, take those credits, get it out of the way, and then they can transfer.
Yep. All right, so Michaels asks, when a player transfers, does he make the decision or does the coaching staff lay out the options? I'm sure every situation is different. Yes, every situation is different, but typically the way that these things will start is all coaches and players are going to have exit interviews at the end of a season. And the players will talk about their feelings on the season, and the coaches will talk about their feelings, and more importantly, talk about expectations moving forward. Now, have there been cases of a coach, quote unquote, running a player off?
Yes.
Of course that has happened. But typically what happens is not something that nefarious. It's more probably like what happened with Clifton Moore, I would guess. And I have no knowledge of this, but I would guess it went something like, Clifton, I'm sure that you're disappointed in how much you played, and Clifton probably agreed that he wanted to play more for the last 2 seasons. And Archie giving him an honest assessment of where he sees him in the pecking order and how many minutes he thinks he can probably get, what role he sees for him, giving him an honest evaluation of it, and then letting Clifton decide, okay, my coach sees me as a 5 to 7 minute a game guy next year. Is that what I want to be? Maybe I should go seek an opportunity elsewhere. And I think if you have a good, honest coach. He will be honest and upfront with players about what their role is. And if that's going to be the case, you should have some transfers because not everybody, when you have 13 scholarships, is going to play as much as they like. So,
and they're not going to hear what they want to hear in that exit interview.
No, and you would want to have a coach like that. Everything that we know about Archie suggests that that is the type of coach that he is. And so I would think that you'll probably see transfers away from Indiana. But hopefully they'll be on good terms where it's like, hey, I appreciate the coach telling me exactly what he thinks. I gave it a shot here. Let me go somewhere else that's maybe a better opportunity. And I think for the most part, that is how it happens. That's certainly how it should happen.
Yeah, and I'll say this, the running people off, it does happen in college basketball. The place it happens the most is college football because you can bring in 25 guys every year, and if you bring in that mass of guys, when you can bring in 25, you offer 70. And sometimes you wind up getting, maybe you have 23 scholarships open. Sometimes you fill that class of 25. You got to get rid of 2 guys before the season starts. So you run guys off. You have them sign medical retirements. You tell them basically you're transferring or we're going to push you out. I haven't seen a whole lot of that at Indiana. I know Grant Galen's situation was different because he didn't fit what Archie was doing. Archie didn't recruit him, so I kind of forgave him a little for that because it was not Archie's player, and he wasn't somebody who fit. They said, hey, you can stay here on scholarship, but you're not going to play, or you can leave. And that was kind of a guy getting run off. I think that
it happens more at Duke, where you got to run off Trevon Duval and Gary Trent to bring in your next class of one and dones.
But that happening at Indiana, it's not something that should happen in Indiana. But I think you have to forgive Archie for that, just based on the fact that he was new. That was a roster spot he wanted open. He did not. That was not a guy that he had recruited or would ever use. And so I think that was the situation behind that. I don't expect Archie to run guys off now. I don't, because now it's his roster. Essentially, it's his roster. He'll have Deron Davis and Devontae Green are the only guys who aren't really his next year. The other guys he recruited. And you can say Justin Smith, whether or not he wanted him or not, or whatever, and make those excuses. But he did recruit Justin Smith. He went out and told Justin Smith to come to Indiana. He told Al Durham to come to Indiana. He told Clifton Moore to come to Indiana. So while that's not a full recruiting class for him, and it was a last minute thing, and he probably needed to keep those guys, those are his. And so now you're going to enter next year with Archie Miller's roster. Basically, you can't make any excuses for his roster next year. Devontae Green may not be the player he wants at that spot, but he's had him for 3. He'll be in his 3rd year with him, so you can't really make that excuse anymore.
Yeah, the only thing that you could say is maybe those aren't guys that he would have recruited. And again,
Perfect.
That's why
right.
it's, that's why you do, it's nice to see a coach be able to get through, and you do have to earn it. You don't just get given it, but it's nice to see a coach get through 4 or 5 years, so you do get to see a full roster of guys that just he recruited. But yes, each year that you get removed from the previous coaching staff, those explanations
fall
go away.
Sure.
All right, so this question submitted by Sean Miller. SHAWN.
Okay.
But the question is, watching Virginia play pack line defense shows it can be effective. What does IU need to do to get to that level? Okay, just Sean Miller.
Just keep developing the system. I mean, keep because the pack line is different than what a lot of these guys have played. And there are different philosophies, there's different responsibilities, there's different, it's different. It's the same as Virginia's offense. Virginia's offense is very different than anything you're going to run. And to give Tony Bennett credit, he changed it up a little bit this year to make it so if they are behind, they can actually switch things up and come back in games, which was not the case the last couple of years. So kudos to him. They're in the Final Four because they've changed their philosophy.
And they have the 3rd most efficient offense this year. Last year it was like 30.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing, is that now he's actually willing to let guys go on the break and let guys kind of freelance a little, whereas the mover blocker, or blocker mover, some people call it, offense does not let you do that. You are very strict in your system, and you have to hit your shots. If you don't hit your shots, you're losing. The thing is, he's had very efficient shooting over the last few years, so that's how Virginia gets good. But the one game the shooting abandons them, they lose. And that's why I always said, you're in the tournament, you're going to face teams that get hot. Look at Auburn. Auburn has just been hot. And when you face a team that gets hot, guess what? You better speed up and match, or you're done. And when you have a slow down offense that only slows down and relies on efficient shooting, if that shooting goes away and you're not hitting, a lot of you, when you have a low level low number of possessions, the other team scoring a lot, you better be hitting almost all your shots. And when that shooting goes away, that's when Virginia would run into trouble. Now they allow their guys to freelance. They allow a little more screen and roll. They allow a little more, ball movement on the perimeter. I know this is a complete, left turn from the question, but it's a matter of, and I think it relates to Indiana too. You have to adjust what you're doing and have backup plans in place. Now, the thing about Tony Bennett is his dad, Dick Bennett, is the one who developed the offense and relied on it and made it, work. And so his offense was of course super tied into being stringent with that offense because he believed it and he grew up in it and he played in it at Wisconsin Green Bay. As for the defense, it's the same thing. You have to be able to pressure guys. You have to be able to pressure the ball, but you have to all be on the same page as far as responsibilities go. And you saw a lot of the freshmen this year when they get in there, even Race Thompson, who I think is a very heady player and has been in the system for 2 years now. He'd get lost on defense every once in a while. And the reason why is because your responsibilities in this defense are different than your responsibilities in a straight man-to-man or man-help defense. It's way more predicated on helping on the drive. It's way more predicated on keeping everybody out of the paint. You don't want guys to go a lot of man-to-man defense. You want to force guys baseline and then cut them off there. In the pack line, you want to force them back into the middle, not baseline. The reason why is because you're always supposed to have help there. And so you're forcing them into the help at every opportunity, and that means that there's more guys there. But the problem with that is you have to get used to, and you see Virginia do it really well, you got to recover to shooters. And Virginia recovers to shooters as well as any defense in the country. It's unbelievable how well they recover to shooters. I would say Texas Tech is probably second in that regard. They do not leave open shooters. And if they do, it's because somebody made a mistake. And so you have to get used to closing out hard, but closing out hard under control so then you can, if the guy decides to drive, feed them into the help instead of getting beaten one-on-one. So
no fake hustle, as coach says.
It's complicated, and it's a lot of drilling down, and it's a lot of defensive work to get it to work. But when it works, you see what Virginia can do defensively. You see what other pack line teams can do defensively when you have those guys in that system that are ready. And you'll see too, Virginia doesn't play a lot of young guys. They play all their, it's seniors, juniors, DeAndre Hunter's a redshirt sophomore. He's their best player. He's a redshirt sophomore. He's been in the system for 3 years, and you look at what they can do. That's why the veteran teams with the pack line are the better ones. And this was a very young Indiana team this year, and they still played well defensively.
And one thing when you watch Virginia, watch how well they communicate. Watch how much they talk on the court. And that's something that we didn't see enough of from Indiana. Look, there's a reason.
The most noticeable parts of what Virginia do, just piggyback on what you said, is you can see them talking. Just mute it and watch them. And they're constantly talking. And the other thing that is really amazing about what they do is how they close out to shooters, but under control. They don't go blazing by shooters. You don't see them bite on pump fakes or anything like that. They close out right in a shooter's face and then are ready to back up and play defense off the drive. So watch that when you're watching them in the Final Four this weekend. Watch how well they communicate. As you said, Jerod, it's a great point. They talk constantly. They have great leadership on the court for it. And then, of course, their ability to defend and close out to shooters and then defend.
It's why they're annually one of the best teams in the country at defending the three-point line, even though the myth exists that they don't do it well. They do. It's also why, again, we've said this, class of 2020, Ethan Morton. It's why he is such an important recruit, because the one thing everybody says about him, he communicates more on defense than anybody I've ever seen. He would be a really big get. The other thing to remember, and we've mentioned this before, most pack line teams, you really see a jump defensively in the third year. A lot of times the offense comes in the fourth or fifth year where you really see the big gains. Look at Virginia, 71st in adjusted defensive efficiency in each of Tony Bennett's first 2 years, then 5th, 25th, 4th, 2nd, 7th, 2nd, 1st, 5th. And this isn't to say that Archie teaches it the same way and that Indiana's going to follow the exact same trajectory as Virginia, but if you look at other programs that run the pack line, the first 2 years are often a little bit underwhelming, and then it's like there's this jump, and it's like, oh, man, the defense clicked. And you've got guys that are in it. There's some institutional knowledge, and things are much better. So that's why, like, I know we get impatient, and I know these first 2 years have been frustrating, but really the fact that Indiana's defense improved as much as it did the first year and then to the second year, there were real gains there that are easy to overlook. And if the same trajectory follows, Indiana should make another jump defensively next year.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it too, you have to drill the defense so hard in the beginning to get guys out of those other habits and get them into the pack line habits. that the offense doesn't get as much time as it maybe should in practice time. You have limited practice time. And so that tracks that once you're comfortable in the defense, you can drill the offense a little bit more.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's see. To Tony, by the way, kudos to Tony Bennett, since we're on the subject of, taking all that criticism last year. I was a guy who criticized him like crazy, and I had in the past too, because I thought their system was not pliable enough for the tournament. In the tournament, you are going to run into crazy stuff, and you got to be able to change what you're doing, change your philosophy.
But you criticized the offense, not the defense. It was the offense.
Right. No, it was always
more than anything.
I've always said their defense is unbelievable. With the offense, the problem was he was very set in his system. And in your system, that system works when everything's going well. When everything goes to hell, it's a problem, because that's a team. It would be like in football, having a team that runs the wishbone option nowadays and running into a spread team that runs up the score on you, and then you've got to get back in the game, and then you have to try and pass the ball. It's if you're that set in the wishbone offense, you can't. That's a hard offense to play from behind with. In football, it's the same thing in basketball. You can't play from behind in a system that its only answer to a game speeding up is to just continually slow it down and slow it down and slow it down and slow it down. Those possessions become way more valuable, and that's a problem if your team, has an off shooting night or faces a team that goes nuclear, like we've seen Auburn do this last week.
So I don't know if you saw, but apparently Kentucky has offered John Calipari a lifetime contract in response to UCLA's lucrative offer.
Yeah, John Calipari had absolutely no interest in UCLA. That's crap. That was his agent putting that out there, so Kentucky offered him.
Smart
very
by
smart.
them.
Yeah, he's not an idiot.
What do you think is going to happen with Chris Beard? And do you think it's possible that he ends up at UCLA? Because he's obviously the hot name after what's happened this year.
Here's the thing. I've been saying all season that UCLA should throw whatever they have at Chris Beard. I've been saying that since December. And the reason why is because he's a guy who goes in and builds a program and it develops it quickly and puts an emphasis on defense, but also efficient offense. UCLA has always been a flashy team. When Ben Howland was there, a guy who relied solely on defense, the fans there hated it, even though he took them to 3 Final Fours or something like that. At least they were in the finals back-to-back years, I believe, or no, finals in the Final Four. And I think he went to 3 Final Fours, but they hated it because it was a slow.
And they had great players. I mean, they had Westbrook and Kevin Love and all these guys.
Yeah, and it was a slow down team that focused on defense. And the problem is that in LA, a lot of the kids you're recruiting want to play up tempo, want to play fast, want to play AAU ball, and so I don't know how Chris Beard would fit there. I don't know if he'd want to go either. I mean, it's a very, right now the fan base is kind of in a malaise. It's a lot like USC football right now. People are frustrated when the team isn't great. They rip on the team. When the team's good, it's 50-50 that they'll show up. I mean, they have to be really good for the team to show up. They showed up a lot when Lonzo Ball was there because that was entertaining. That was a guy who was really entertaining. But in general, you have to be really good to get people to go. And it's the same for USC football. USC football has that, 100,000 seat stadium, and, you get 60,000 a game. That's pretty good for college football. It looks empty, when there's 60,000 people there. It's the same with Pauley Pavilion. It looks empty all the time, no matter how excited the students are. You got to get the other people to come. I'm not sure if what Chris Beard is building at Texas Tech to him is more important than that. I'm sure that there's a chance, I've heard, that Texas might come calling, but Texas appears to be set with Shaka Smart to give him another year. We saw Texas A&M just go after Buzz Williams. Looks like that's a done deal. And it's been rumored for a long time that Buzz was going to go to one of the Texas schools ever since he was at Marquette. So that's not surprising. So I don't know. We'll see with Chris Beard. The fact that he lost his 5 top scorers and has his team in the Final Four this year is unbelievable. And that is who I have said for a long time UCLA should be throwing tons of money at him. But I'm not sure that's where they want to focus. And if they don't focus on him, if they don't at least make a run on him, everybody in the athletic department should be fired. That's the top job available, and they should go after him. Even if he says, what's the worst he can do? Say no. There are other options out there. Luke Walton's going to be available. He's a great coach, but he's not fitting with the Lakers. He's going to be the fall guy for this season, even though he doesn't deserve it. I know that some people in LA want them to hire Luke Walton. Some people out there want him to hire Earl Watson. So I don't know what's going to end up shaking out there, but if they don't make Chris Beard their top priority and go after him with everything they got, it's malpractice at this point.
If worse comes to worse, you rehire Steve Alford, run it back.
Yeah. I mean, we can't go wrong.
All right, Ryan.
People are saying they're going to go after Tony Bennett. Tony Bennett would hate that job.
Yeah. Any final thoughts? Obviously, we will continue to have Assembly Call Radio all throughout the season, but this will be your last appearance here on Monday because we're not going to be doing this until the new season starts again. But final thoughts?
So sad. We'll do a banner Monday if something big happens, though, I assume, right? I mean,
yeah, we'll do special edition episodes every now and then, as we always do. But
just let me know ahead of time because you told me the other day that we were done with Banner Monday, and then I got a Twitter alert this week that was like, hey, we got our final Banner Monday. I was like, I thought the last one was our final. Okay. You told me on the show last week before we went live that we weren't doing it anymore. I mean, I'm fine with it. You said we were done for the season. You may have meant done for the season after Monday, but you did say done for the season, so I assumed done for the season. But,
see, who are people going to trust here? Me or the guy who has proudly claimed that he never listens to anything that happens on the show?
I re-listened to that show, so no. It was before we went on the air. So anyway, no, always happy to be here. Love you guys. Thanks for watching.
Cool. See you, man.
Later.
All right, coming up on the Assembly Call, it is time for our final Big Ten Roundup of the season with Mike DeCourcy. We'll put a bow on Indiana's 2019 season and then discuss the thrilling Elite Eight performances delivered by Purdue and Michigan State over the weekend. That and more. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right, let's bring on Mike. Awesome to see so many of you here live. Great to see you all. There he is, Mike DeCourcy. Ready to roll. How are you, Mike? Let's see. Oh, good anecdotes there, Joel, about Al Durham. That's good to see. How you doing? Do we have you? Do we have audio? There we go.
There we go.
All right. I will play some intro music, and we'll hop right into it.
Okay.
I apologize. I am going to have to ask you at least one or two questions about Indiana, and then I promise we'll quickly get to Elite Eight stuff.
I get it.
All right. Here we go. Welcome back to Banner Monday. Each week here in our second segment, we zoom out to get an objective opinion on our Hoosiers and to take a look at how things are going across the Big Ten Conference. There's no one better to do that than Mike DeCourcy, who covers Big Ten hoops for BTN in addition to his columns for the Sporting News. Mike, welcome back to Banner Monday. What a weekend of college basketball we were just treated to.
Yeah, you know, I spent I went to Columbia for Sunday's games, Virginia, Oklahoma, and Duke, Central Florida, UCF, and then I was in Louisville. And I don't know what it is, like the fairy dust, pixie dust, magic dust that's following me around. But if it's me that's doing it, then Minneapolis is going to be amazing. Because I mean, I did my 30th tournament, I think 2 years ago, and so we did a list of the top 30 games that I covered. Not they were in the tournaments, but that I was actually at in those 30 years. And in the space of 7 days, I got 3 probably that would bump out top 10 games. It was amazing.
It was amazing. All right, well, hold that thought because we are going to get to that. Let's talk real quick about Indiana, kind of put a bow on the season. The Hoosiers, it seems like weeks ago, lost to Wichita State in the NIT. It was just last Tuesday. But the season came to an end. How will you remember the 2018-19 Indiana basketball season, if at all, I suppose?
Well, I mean, I guess if you remember you remember it as a disappointment. They were 12-2 coming into the heart of the Big Ten season. Got some injuries that they couldn't manage, and were unable to find an alternative to playing big with Deron Davis, to having Robert Finney as point guard. Got in a really bad way, and wound up. And did it in the wrong season because to be not good enough in this particular Big Ten season meant you were going to have a difficult time getting off the deck. We saw that with Illinois early. We saw that with Penn State, which had a fair non-conference and then a disastrous start to its league season. So Indiana was not alone in that. But then when they got it together, they had a chance still at an NCAA tournament bid because of the couple big wins they had. And then in what was basically a showdown game, maybe elimination game is too strong a word, but it was something it was either a showdown game or elimination game or something, and they did not compete at the level they needed to compete for 34 minutes maybe. And then they did compete at that level for the final 6, but that didn't get it done.
So, as you go around and you watch these teams that played in the Elite Eight, I mean, the best of the best in college basketball, what are the biggest differences between those teams and those programs and Indiana right now? Like, is it a talent thing? Is it a culture thing? Like, what are the biggest differences? What does Indiana need to get to the level of those teams?
Well, I think that you can't say it's a talent thing because, I mean, you played Purdue. You know what they look like. And Purdue could just as easily be playing today or active today, I guess would be a better word, as they are inactive now. They could just as easily be. So I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that when you say culture, I think that you have to have a coaching staff whose message is worth buying, and then you have to buy it. And I think that certainly Archie Miller's success in the past suggests that his message is worth buying, but I don't think that there was complete buy-in at the Indiana this season from top to the bottom of the roster. And I don't think that I don't think that you could find many players at Purdue who did not buy in. You might be able to find a few, but they weren't playing on Saturday. There was, from the guys who were playing, I mean, I don't see how you can say it's talent when a guy like Grady Eifert is out there playing meaningful minutes in an Elite Eight game and making, and making an impact. It wasn't his greatest game ever, but he almost saved the victory for them with the offensive rebound late in the game. So I think that you have to look at it as a process, though. I mean, Matt hit on his first class with that group that had Juwan Johnson and Etwan Moore and Robbie Hummel and Scott Martin that ended up leaving. And
yeah,
great class, incredible class. And that wasn't really his first class, but what people don't remember is the way that transitioned. Gene spent his last year coaching Purdue, and Matt spent that year on the bench, effectively on the staff, and his role was to do whatever Gene needed him to do, but mostly to get ready for the next year. So it wasn't a typical transition. It wasn't what you get now, where you walk in the door and you've got, let's say here in the state of Indiana, where you legit have 5+ high major players in every class. And anyone who knows Indiana basketball or knows recruiting knows that when you get hired in March and you walk in, those players are mostly ready to go to some other school. If Indiana was in with those players, the people who left were the ones who were in. So now you're out of the picture. And if you weren't in the picture, how do you get in it? So that's the part of it that people don't understand. That's the part that people don't understand about what went down at Vanderbilt when he had a terrible season, Bryce Drew, and gets fired for going 0-18. But he'd only been there for 3 years. And what could he do in 3 years to change the culture of the program? Well, we made the tournament the year before or 2 years, and we had 19 wins. Yeah, but you had no talent in your bottom classes. You had none. So he had to come and completely replenish that. And then he loses the most important player of that, and you don't expect there to be an impact. Well, they're now, fishing out from underneath that. And Rick Bozich, who, obviously, we both know him and we know people close to him. And
love Rick Bozich.
Yes, he's great. And he did a wonderful job on a column that he wrote last week where he looked at the Sweet 16 and he averaged out how many years each of the coaches was there. And also, you look at guys like Leonard Hamilton and look at how many years he was at Florida State before he made the tournament. Now, I know Florida State's not Indiana, and Indiana doesn't aspire, although Indiana may aspire to be where Florida State was last weekend, they don't aspire to have Florida State's basketball program, and they shouldn't. But you have to have something. It takes some time to build something into something special. And it's a process that you can't have. You're not always going to get immediate results. There are ways to do it immediately. They usually result in you not having a successful program, but more so maybe having a successful team for a short period of time. If this is going to go right, he needs to continue to do what he's done over the last few years, which is start here in the state of Indiana and get really good high school basketball players interested in Indiana again. And what's he done in that department? Well, he got Robert Finnessy. He got Demezi. Ultimately he got Romeo. And then in this next class, he's got Trey. So it's making progress. It's working. And you have to give it some time to work right. And that's the message that you have to take out of this year. It should have been better. There weren't many breaks in making it better. But at the end, you have to look at it as you got a year's worth of experience for Robert Finnessy. You got Romeo Langford here to show Indiana players that there's a path there, even if it wasn't a path to great success. There was a path there, and you built, you started to build towards something special. And I think it's a very important offseason for IU now. They've got, they got to iron some things out. I don't think there's any question about that. And I don't know exactly what direction it'll take, but I trust Arch as a coach. People think like you have all this success at Dayton, and then you cross the state line, literally go like an hour and a half, and all of a sudden you lose everything that you knew about how to build a program and how to be successful. Life doesn't work like that.
So with that said, what do you think is a fair expectation for his third season? And I know we have to see how the offseason shakes out to see what the roster looks like, but just generally, what do you think is fair for IU fans to expect in his third year?
I'll tell you what they should expect. What they should demand, and what he should demand, is buy-in. Like, you can't be looking out there on the floor and know who's not buying in. You can't. Next year, it can't happen. That cannot be the case. Next year, he can't look out on the floor and know that he's got guys not buying in. That, he can't tolerate another year of that. He had Romeo for 1 year. It's a transitional year. It's only a second year. You had a shot at making the tournament. But next year, you got to have guys that are all the way in. And if they're not, then you can't tolerate it. Because if you do, then you're building you're allowing a specific culture to be built for you that isn't the one you intend and isn't the one that's going to take you and Indiana basketball where you want it to be and where Indiana fans believe it should be.
It's a great point. A great point. All right, so let's turn our attention now to a couple of the teams that played this weekend, to Purdue and Michigan State, who played thrilling games. Obviously, one team won, one team didn't. I want to talk with you first about Purdue. And this kind of piggybacks on what you started talking about with them earlier. You look at the last two seasons. They have fielded rosters with a total of 2 top 100 recruits, which is incredible. And they've finished 5th and 9th in KenPom. They've won 77% of their games. They shared a Big Ten title, made a Sweet 16, and an Elite 8. My question for you is this the ceiling for Purdue basketball under Matt Painter, or with his development as a coach and what I think was actually a perception-changing run that they just had because of the way they played and the offense and just the stage that it was on, could that raise the ceiling on what's possible moving forward for Purdue?
Well, I wouldn't expect necessarily all of a sudden them to be winning national championships or something. I wouldn't put it completely out of the realm of possibility, but I think it would take some good fortune. A Biggie Swanigan, when they had Biggie, they were not positioned to be a Final Four national championship type team. They didn't have the point guard for it. They didn't have the outside offensive dynamism that they have now, the ability to explode on a team the way Carson did over each of the last 2 games. Each of the last 3, I should say. They didn't have that then. So some of it has to be a little bit good fortune. I mean, if you look at the types of players that they had a year ago, I mean, they could have made the Final Four if they happened to be in another region. They could have played in the Elite 8 if Isaac Haas hadn't gotten injured. They could have won the national championship in 2010, I believe. I mean, they had Etuan Pro, Juwan Pro, Robbie Pro. They had enough there to win it if Robbie had been able to finish the year. And that was not a great year for, the national champion, Duke was not a historically great team. They were an excellent team for that season. They won 35 games. I think they lost 5, something like that. They weren't a historically great team. There were 4 teams in 2015 that would have won the championship in more than half of this decade's seasons. Arizona, Wisconsin, Duke, and Kentucky would have won the championship in more than half of this season's the seasons we've had in this particular decade. And it seems as if we get teams like Robbie's team that year, or Arizona in 2014 when Brandon Ashley got hurt, or Virginia in 2016 when Justin Anderson got hurt. We've had a lot of years like that where there was maybe 1 or 2, teams that were above everybody else, potential-wise and performance-wise, and then it fell apart because of an injury. And Purdue is one of those teams. So you can't say that they can't win a championship. But again, you look at that year, he was right in his sweet spot. He got 4 great players to commit, 3 of whom stayed. Is that going to happen again? It's not been his MO since. It's not happened a lot since. But one of the things that he said in 2014, I think it was 2014-15, at Big Ten Media Day. One of the most, I go to those media day things all the time, right? And you've been there. And it's like, it's fun to interact with people, but when the guys get up and talk, there's not a lot always that's said that's impactful. But I still remember him standing up there at Media Day in 2014 and saying, I got away from recruiting Purdue guys. They had been 5-13, I think. I got away from recruiting Purdue guys. It's not a school district. I go get the players, basically, and I got the wrong guys, and I'm not getting guys from now on who aren't Purdue guys. And look at what's happened since. I don't think they had anybody transfer out, maybe 1 or 2, not much. The guys he's getting, Dakota Mathias, Carson Edwards, Isaac Haas, Matt Harms, not always, universally respected or admired prospects, but all guys who have invested in what the culture is there and how they make you better and how they maximize what you do. And so, can they get into another sweet spot where they can get a Hummel and a Johnson, and then can they carry those guys forward to a title? I would never put it out of the reach for them because he's too good a coach and the program is too solidly grounded. But I wouldn't say at the immediate future, you look at it and say, okay, well, because they did this, they're going to now do that. Now, if Carson comes back next year, you'd have to say that it's plausible because they've got, they'll be really dynamic with Wheeler getting more time, with Harms in the front court. I would suspect that Travion Williams will come back in even better shape because it took a lot to get to this. And then if he has a great offseason, he comes back with a great body and with those hands and that passing ability. And there's a lot of possibility there. I don't think that without Carson, there's necessarily enough juice there to be Final Four level. But they're going to be really good next year, regardless of whether they're that.
He's such a great athlete and such a good shooter. I think it's ludicrous that, some people don't think he's an NBA player because I think it's quite clear that he is, with a floor of being, kind of a microwave scorer off the bench and potentially more because he can be a more efficient shooter than he was this year. He just had to take so many shots. Do you expect him back, or do you think that especially with this explosion that he just had, the time is right for him to go?
I think it depends on what he wants to do, because he's never going to be drafted in the first round. They're not going to take a 6'6" shooting guard in the first round who doesn't have point guard skills, even though, I shouldn't say that because he does have point guard skills. He just isn't a point guard. They're not going to change him now. He is what he is, and he can pass the basketball. He's got great passing skill. It's just, what people don't understand. I wrote about that performance on Saturday night and how amazing it was. And I pointed out that he had actually incredibly outperformed Steph Curry's 2008 run through the NCAA tournament. I think he scored 139 points in 4 games, and Steph scored 128. Now, he had the advantage as a 3 seed of an easy early game, but he actually played his best against the 3 good teams. Villanova, Big East champion, played phenomenally well. I think he had 42 in that one. Then the Tennessee game, he had 29. Tennessee was number 1 for a part of this year. And then against the ACC champion Virginia, he goes 42 again. And people are like, well, but he didn't have any assists. I mean, like, do you understand, first of all, how Virginia defends? That getting an assist, maybe he makes a pass to somebody for an open 3, maybe. But they're not letting you get assists. And he wasn't in positions to get assists. He was scoring because he was so far out that they had a hard time guarding him out there. That's why he was scoring. So he wasn't going to get assists. The only way they were making baskets was him putting it over the defense. They completely shut off Ryan Klein. He wasn't getting into the positions to get shut off. If he'd gone closer, they'd have doubled him, trapped him, made him give up the ball, and then he wouldn't have scored 42. He is a tremendous, tremendous player. He had a rough February for whatever reason, lost his eye, lost his touch, whatever you want to call it, and probably lost his chance to be a first-team All-American as a result of that. But he still belonged where he was second or third team, and I know he's gotten some recognition along those lines. And he delivered an NCAA tournament performance that belongs in the conversation with Steph Curry and Austin Carr and all those other players who did incredible things in the tournament. Glenn Rice. Now, the difference with Glenn Rice was Glenn got to go on and do 2 more games and win it. And them, missing the free throw at the end, not handling the scramble on that missed free throw at the other end, cost him a chance to do that. But I have no doubt he's a pro. I expect him to see him in the league, and it's really just up to him. Let me put it this way: I suspect he will go, but it'd be really cool to see him again for another year. Try to take a shot at doing this again. You only do it, you don't do it because I want to make a Final Four necessarily, because then you spend the whole year and then something like that happens and it's like a wasted year. You can't do it for that reason. You got to do it because there's something more you want to get out of this, whatever it might be. Another year with the guys, another year of improvement, whatever it is. But if he leaves now, he certainly has made his contribution to Purdue basketball history.
Yes, he certainly has. So Michigan State. The Spartans have not lost since Indiana beat them in March. 9 victories, 8 of them against top 50 teams, only 3 of them within 10 points. I mean, they have really turned things around, culminating with that win against Duke. What changed for them after that day in Bloomington?
Well, I think what changed for them was the injury that happened to Nick Ward you go back to the Ohio State game, and that forced them to change their identity. And Xavier Tillman coming into the lineup made them a dramatically better defensive team because Xavier was enormous yesterday in dealing with the most difficult defensive matchup he'll probably ever have in his college career, going against Zion Williamson and what all that represents. Nick Ward went in there and Nick did battle. And I thought that for the first time that I can remember since his injury and since his return, it was really the first time that I thought he was fully all into what they needed from him. He wasn't able to deliver it all. He didn't shoot the basketball well from the post, but he was out there to do what he was asked to do for the first time. And I suspect that he'll do the same now that they're in the Final Four, because this isn't about you anymore now. I mean, it's about the name on the jersey, so to speak. He bought into that. And I think that makes them a better team, because if you've got him coming off the bench and running and pounding in the post and using his big body, and he does all that, and Xavier Tillman's out there, guarding ball screens in the way that Nick couldn't, and moving his feet in the post the way that Nick couldn't. And also, honestly, offensively, I mean, he's been shockingly good. I don't think anybody knew he had this in him. Now, he doesn't really have a low post game in the way that Nick does, but he can make a shot. He's shown that over and over again. He's really good at getting the ball off the offensive glass and putting it back in efficiently. That's more of a skill than people realize. a lot of guys can get the ball off the glass and then eat it on the way back up. Watch Kentucky yesterday, happened to them way too much. But he's been really good about getting the ball off the glass and making sure he gets it back home, with the pump fake or with the, the quick step to the opposite side, whatever it might be to disarm the defense. That's what's made them different and better. I think that Indiana played great in the second game. They played with desperation. They and they had a great home court advantage. And I think that all of that came down to making a difference. And I think one more thing was, I think that a lot had built up on Cassius Winston fatigue-wise at that point in the season. And although his minutes have been about the same, especially in the tournament, you know how it goes in the tournament, 20-minute halftime, 3-minute, 2.5, 3-minute commercial breaks. It's not as draining. The atmosphere, the stakes, they can overwhelm you. But the physicality of playing 40 minutes is not as tough. And sometimes that gets coaches into trouble. Because I thought, for instance, John Calipari played Reed Travis too much in the game against Auburn. Thought that there were times when they needed a different look, and because he knew he could ride Reed, he went with it. But with Cassius, there's never a time when they're better with him off the floor. So him being able to be out there now and not get as tired is a big difference maker.
He's an amazing player. He's one of my favorite non-IU players that I can remember to watch. Someone on the broadcast described him as a wizard, and I thought that was the perfect description for how he plays point guard offensively. He's a wizard. He sees things that I don't know how he sees, and he's an incredible shot maker. I mean, he's got the entire package offensively.
I'm disappointed really in the announcers on the network, because no one's buying, no one's picking up on the Pearl Monroe comparison. I mean, he's not Pearl, and Pearl was bigger and more dynamic, but he's got that game. I mean, it's exactly what it looked like. I'm telling you, the close in control of the ball, the ability to go to either side, that pull up floater, all that stuff. That was Pearl over and over again. I've not gotten the chance to ask Cash whether he's ever watched Pearl's films or old tapes or whatever. But that's something I got to make a mental note to do when I get to Minneapolis and get a little time with him and see if that's something that, if that's how he got to his game. Because you haven't seen many, it's been, Pearl was 45 years ago-ish, 40 to 45 years ago. There haven't been many players in those 5 decades that have had a game like that.
Yeah. Well, one last question for you. This was submitted by Matt, and I thought that you might have some insight on it. He said, the talk radio hosts after Michigan State wiped out Duke all began lamenting that the remaining teams will not bring ratings for the Final Four, which is true, that was what was being lamented, even though I think this Final Four shapes up to be so much fun. So Matt's questions: 1, aren't those ad spots already sold and the broadcasting package already paid for, so why would the NCAA care at this point? And 2, aren't the broadcasters themselves responsible for the upcoming quote-unquote poor ratings because they have only been pumping up one team and specifically one layer for the last few months?
Well, I got a lot of pushback on some things I've written on Zion. The guy was a phenomenal player. He was certainly a once-in-a-generation college player. And it was just to say he was the greatest. But he's the best college player we've seen this decade. I had Kentucky fans tell me Anthony Davis. Look, Anthony Davis was magical. He was wonderful, and he won them a championship. There's no question about that. He was the guy, and he was the reason they won it, the biggest reason. But he wasn't the only reason. And Zion certainly isn't the only reason they lost yesterday. He isn't basically any of the reason that they lost yesterday. I guess maybe some of it, because he did turn the ball over 5 times, but he was phenomenal in a lot of ways. He changed that game so often. You saw Michigan State, how often they started to look around to see where he is when they got the ball adjacent to the goal. It became a real challenge for them. And you saw him, even on an open 3-pointer, close out and knock the ball away on a ridiculous block. I don't pay much attention to networks other than the one for which I work. And so I don't get bothered by overhype. I didn't feel like the hype for first of all, I didn't feel like the hype for Zion was unjustified. He was that good, is that good. And second of all, I didn't feel like it was as in my face as what happened with Trae Young a year ago when they started putting graphics on the screen telling you how many points he had in any second. And then they started putting those graphics on games that he wasn't playing in. That was a bit much. I didn't feel like that this year. So look, Zion drew people because he was unique. And I don't know what the audience will be like for this weekend's games and next Monday's game, but I know that people who love college basketball will be watching. It's really what matters to me. In the end, for TBS and Turner and for CBS, they need people to watch because it helps them sell ad time for the next one. And certainly their ratings would have been enormous if Zion were in there on Monday or on Saturday. I think for now on, people can shut down the whole, well, look what they do for teams that they want to have ratings. I mean, clearly it wasn't that wide a margin that they couldn't have found a way if that was really what they were trying to do to get Duke in. They only lost by 1 point. So if they were really trying, I think they could have got them another couple points. They weren't. That's not.
Some people might suggest they just didn't want to do it 3 games in a row.
Oh gosh, yeah, they wouldn't want to do it now that the stage is the biggest it's going to be. At the end of the day, they didn't quite have enough there. They weren't a good enough outside shooting team. Cam Reddish for me has always been, an acquired taste, I guess. I've never, when I saw him as a prospect, I did not like his compete level. I think that Mike and his staff did the best they could to get the most out of him, but I don't love him as a player. I really liked RJ. I didn't love his season either. I thought you saw a good bit of what was wrong with Duke when Zion was out, and they were 3-3 without him. So, people trying to say, because they don't like K, that this is a massive failure and he had all the best players. Let's relax. He had the best college basketball player of the last decade, didn't win it. But it's not the first time we've had a player of the year didn't win a tournament. I mean, it's more rare when he does. So I don't worry about the NCAA. They still get their check. I don't worry about CBS or Turner. I think they're invested in this, and they're going to be there for the next 14 years, I think, something like that, maybe even longer. So in the end, I think it'll all work itself out. And there may not be the greatest television draws in Texas Tech and Auburn, for instance, but you've got 4 great teams there, and I expect to have 3 really competitive games, and I think in the end that will draw a lot of sports fans.
I agree. By the way, Kurt in the chat, his wife is in advertising. He said viewer ratings have to deliver or else the network will have to deliver free spots in other events. And it's not as much about what was already sold, but as you mentioned, Mike, negotiating spots in the future, aired by the same network based on what ratings they get. So that's kind of the answer to that question. And, you're right. Like Texas Tech and Auburn might not draw in a lot of the casual fans, but my goodness, are they interesting basketball teams with just the way that they play and the styles that we're going to get to see this weekend. I can't wait. Last question for you. Who's your pick? I mean, this unlikely Final Four, who do you think is going to be the last one standing in the end?
Well, I had Duke coming into the tournament. The only it's funny. I had 15 out of 16. I had 6 out of 8, but I only have 1 out of 4. I thought Kentucky would get through. I thought obviously Duke would get through. I thought Gonzaga. Actually, out of that one, I had Michigan, and Michigan didn't make the regional final. So I'm probably gonna go with Michigan State. I think they're the best team left when they play their best, and they certainly did on Sunday. Especially in the second half, they were phenomenal. I think early in the game, Michigan State looked a little bit like that moment that I talked about was a little big for them. But the second half, it was like they looked like they were playing. They were playing in the Maui Invitational. That it was just a game that 3 months from now they'd either get a quality win or they wouldn't. And they played like they wanted that quality win. The The layup McQuaid made was ridiculous. The shot that Kenny Goins made. Those were two guys that early in the first 10 minutes or so did not look like themselves. But by the end of the game, they were the best versions of themselves. And if they can do that again in the next two, I think they can win it all.
Well, Mike, thank you for being here every week. We've really appreciated these spots. And obviously we're going to take a hiatus for the offseason, exhale, relax a little bit, and see what the Hoosiers do this offseason, but hopefully we can pick this up again next season. And I know everybody's really appreciated your insight. I've gotten tons of positive comments about, loving your segment. So on behalf of everybody who listens to the show, thanks for being here with us and kind of helping us navigate this season and giving us insight on the team and the rest of the Big Ten.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm very happy to hear that Banner Monday fans have been appreciative. Obviously I want people to be happy with with the analysis, so I'm glad that it was worth the time.
And now we look forward to hopefully analyzing a season that's a little bit more successful and lasts a little bit longer.
We'll see how it goes.
We'll hope for that next year. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jerod.
All right, the great Mike DeCourcy with us here every Monday on Banner Monday this season, and as we put our schedule together for next year, we will obviously hope to be able to do that again. Look, usually our next segment is all about previewing the upcoming opponent. There is no upcoming opponent, so that means there is no next segment. But look, this isn't goodbye because we're going to talk to you again on Thursday and keep doing the regular Thursday shows. But I do want to mention to everybody who is here live and who has been here live all season long, thank you. It makes doing these shows a lot more fun, a lot more rewarding when there are people in the chat interacting. When you can call me out on mistakes that I make or add, comments or questions that, that I can bring up on the air that add additional context to what we're talking about. And it really shows how much doing these shows mean to you all to see so many people show up live. And I know that not everybody can show up live. So those of you listening on the podcast as well, look, we love talking IU basketball, no question about it. But, we really love creating this content for you and really appreciate all of the appreciation that you send back our way. So thank you for that. We really appreciate it. And like I said, certainly not goodbye. We will keep doing. We're not going to do any more Banner Mornings, no more Banner Mondays during the off season. But we will, of course, continue to do our shows every Thursday night live and posting the podcast after that. And it's going to be a long, interesting, busy off season, and we look forward to going through it all with you. And by the way, if you're listening on the podcast, if you haven't had a chance to check out our community, which is where we get all of our questions for the mailbags, definitely check that out. If you go to assemblycall.com/community, you'll find the details for that. That is kind of the place where we'll continue to have ongoing daily conversation about the Hoosiers, and then Thursday nights do our regular show. All right, well, that is going to do it for us on this week's edition of Banner Monday. If you want to see us broadcast live throughout the offseason and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com for our weekly Assembly Call radio broadcasts on Thursday nights. And you can always, of course, subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, go to Assembly Call or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter, which we will continue doing into the offseason with the Six Banner Sunday news roundups. Thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again on Thursday night. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
All right, and cut. And cut. Tyler, hopefully everybody can avoid getting caught in the bear's mouth during the offseason.
Walking into a bear's mouth.
Absolutely. And hopefully Indiana brings in some good players, some grad transfers, some new guys that can help fill the holes for next season. It's an important year, a very important year. I'm with a lot of the people that I saw in the chat, and and with Mike, and the same way. It's so easy to get impatient and to get hasty with our expectations for where we want Indiana to be from a success perspective. And this season could have and should have been better, but it did still represent a step forward. I still like the way that Archie is building the program moving forward, and really looking forward to certainly next year and really the next 2 years to see. It'd be nice to kind of fast forward through it and see where we are and see if he gets this thing back kind of on solid ground. But, the journey is what makes it interesting. So this year's journey was, frustrating, but it adds additional context to what is to come. So hopefully that journey is a rewarding one. And I think there's still reasons to be optimistic about it. So I look forward to seeing how it all plays out. All right. Thanks everybody for being here. We'll talk to you on Thursday night, I'm going to go post the podcast.